invite you to pop up and take the mic. Could we please give them a shout? So, this is the bit that perhaps I can become a little less me and a little bit more perhaps what I would like to be, which is, of course, a writer. I think every one of us would love to do what you've done, but perhaps not all of us have it in us to do that, I don't know. Peter, you're a crime novelist and an extremely successful one, and we are just thrilled to have you here, so thank you once again.
It's great to be back, yeah.
Yeah, it's
years.
really super, thank you. My first question for you is, what led you to become a crime novelist? Because I don't suppose you've been doing it all your life. You must have had a bit of life experience before that.
Yeah, I'd always wanted to be a writer, and I started working in television in Canada, and I came back to England in the mid-70s and met my then now long ex-wife. And she said to me, when are you going to write the novel you've been talking about? And I had actually written 3 novels in my teens, which luckily never got published and still languished in an attic. But I read an article in the Times that there was a shortage of spy thrillers. Fleming had recently died. I thought I could write a spy thriller. So I did. And to my amazement, it was called Dead Letter Drop, and to my absolute amazement, it got published, and to my even bigger amazement, it completely didn't sell. I think it sold a grand total of 1,800 copies between hardback and paperback. And my publishers, I had a 2-book contract. I read a second one, and that did even worse. Then I wrote called Atom Bomb Angel. Then I wrote a third called Billionaire, which did even worse still. And actually, I kept them out of print for 30 years, and they came back into print. They started coming back into print 2 years ago. I think Billionaire's actually coming out in January. An amazing Dead Letter Drop got to number 4 here, and it was number 1 in Russia in May this year. I still don't mean that as a recommendation to buy it. It's very all right. But the first book had just come out, and we got burgled. I can strongly recommend getting burgled to any newlywed couple, because it gives you the perfect excuse to explain to your relatives why all those horrible things they've given you are not on display. You know, Auntie, you know, that porcelain donkey with the clock in it stuck up, you know, they took it. But a young detective came to take fingerprints, and he saw the book, and he said, oh, you know, is that you? I was proud of it, and I said, yes. He said, if you want any research help with the police, give me a call. And he was married to a detective, and my wife and I became friends with them. They invited us to a boxing fight, police boxing fight, then to a police social night, then to a barbecue at their house. And almost all of their friends, as is very common in the police, were also police officers. Mm. Everything from response, traffic, homicide detectives, soccers, police divers. And I found these people fascinating.
I'm fascinated listening. Tell me more.
I began talking to them. I started to realize that nobody sees more of human life in a 30-year career than a cop. You know, they'd see everything from a cop death to domestic abuse to horrendous murder to a terrible accident. They see every facet of the human condition. And I started putting police scenes, characters more and more into my novels. I started writing initially supernatural thrillers, then I moved to psychological thrillers. And I always wanted to write crime, and I always thought there were too many good people doing it, like Devon's own Agatha Christie and people like Ian Rankin, and I just thought there wasn't a space. And around 2000, my publishers approached me, Pam Macmillan, and said, had I ever thought of writing a crime novel? And I said, absolutely. And I had met, in about 1995, a young detective, a DI called Dave Gaylor, who was at Brighton Police Station. And I always remember going to his office, and some of my police friends thought I'd find it interesting. And I went into his office, and it was a complete tip. It was just full of blue and green plastic crates bulging with manila folders. And I saw this head poking out at the back of the room. And I said, oh, sorry, are you moving? He said, no, these are my dead friends. Oh. I thought, great, I've met the only weirdo in Sussex CID. And he then explained, he said, I'm a homicide detective, but I've just been tasked with reopening all the unsolved murders in the county of Sussex. Each one of these crates contains the principal case file. I am the last chance each of the victims have for justice and that their families have for closure. And I love that human image, and we became good friends. And he started helping me on my books, and he rose to become Detective Chief Superintendent, Head of Major Crime for Sussex. And when my publisher said, had I ever thought of creating a detective as a central character, I went to Dave and I said, how would you like to be a fictional cop? And he loved the idea, and he is my real life Roy Grace.
Is he? I was going to say, he's who you both.
And we work very closely together on every book in terms of planning. He reads every 100 pages. Because I'm an absolute stickler for research, which is why, and for new technology, and you know, police and villains are always playing catch up. There was such a godsend the day I met Hayden a few years back to find this extraordinary new field he was into.
Absolutely, yes. Well, that leads me a little bit on, you've partially answered it already, but where you get your inspiration from, I would imagine it's from being quite observant and being around opportunity to think about your characters, for example. But where do you get your plots from? Do you draw from real life, or do you have very, very creative flair?
No, I draw a lot from real life. In fact, I met Hayden as a result of being stalked. I had a stalker for 11 years. And that which gave me inspiration to write a novel about stalking, which was Want You Dead, which is also drawn from a couple of true life cases. But as a result of being stalked, we put in a huge security system at our house. And the guy who installed it invited me to dinner, and he knew Hayden. And Hayden started telling me what he did, and I thought, I've got to put this in a book. But I honestly get inspiration from almost anything. I mean, I find, I often tell new kind of would-be writers or story-writers, the best resource in the world is a newspaper. You know, everything that happens, almost you could ever want to write about, is in a newspaper. Yeah. I get inspiration from going out with the police, from going to police. I go to quite a few police conferences around the world and listen to case histories. And almost every book I've written has come from, at its core, somewhere something that I've read, or a true story that I've heard of, or a number of true stories that have inspired me.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating, and I'm kind of a bit jealous of what your work involves, I have to say. I'm quite sure that some people who've come along tonight have come along with that literary interest, maybe in reading and studying English, and maybe even becoming a writer themselves. I'm just interested perhaps in a little bit about how you go about writing. Do you have a particular time of the day that you like to write, or is there a special place for you? How does your writing work?
I have a kind of slightly back to front day, because can you all hear me okay, by the way? Good. I get a little bit of feedback if it's too close, so I make sure you can hear me. I wrote my first about 15 novels when I was also working full-time in film and television as a producer and a scriptwriter. I made my me time, which is, I believe as a writer, what's really important is continuity, is to try to write, for me, 6 days a week, and break one day. And I always say to anybody who wants to write, find the amount that you're comfortable with. Even if it's 250 words a day, 4 days you've got 1,000 words. You know, the average novel is 100,000 words, and it soon builds up. Yeah. I found the best time for me was 6 till 9:30, 10 at night, which I still do. Stiff drink, fag, music, and I get in the zone. And I look forward to that time of day. And I do that 5 days a week. And on a Saturday, I tend to write in the mornings. And then what I do is I revise in the morning when I wrote the night before. Hope I didn't get too smashed and it makes sense. And revise, and I plan when I'm going to write that evening. Then in the afternoon I break and I either deal with emails or walk the dogs or whatever. But I think I love writing. I mean, I so many writers I meet say, I like doing the research, but writing is a chore. To me, I absolutely am never happier than sitting in front of my laptop or my desktop and hammering a story out.
So I'm writing a thesis at the moment, and I've just taken a big note. Where's Graham gone? I can't see him. There he is. So stiff drink and a fag, and I'll be writing a lot better by the sounds of it.
I tell you, I know Stephen King, he writes on grass, and everybody has something that gets them.
Something that gets them going. Do you suffer from writer's block at all? And if you do, how do you overcome it?
Okay, I'm going to be controversial on this one. I do not believe in writer's block. I think it is a complete myth. Writer's block is what happens to people who haven't planned their story. I mean, would you get in a car and start driving without having any idea where you were going to go? I'm astonished at the number of writers I talk to who say, well, I decided to start writing a book, but I didn't really know how it was going to end. Well, are you going to go to Tesco's, John O'Groats, or what are you going to do? Or drive around your driveway till you hit something? If you have to plan a book, and it may sound banal. I mean, the extreme is Jeffrey Deaver, who writes a 300-page plan of his novels, and I could not do that. I like to surprise myself. But the first thing that I do when I plan a novel is I plan the end. I have a vanishing point on the horizon that I want to get to, and I plan the first 100 pages or so in some detail. And I make a very simple kind of graph of the key high points of the book. So yeah, there are times when I get stuck on what I'm going to write, and I go for a walk around the garden or have another vodka martini. Or talk to Laura, my wife, for a few minutes or whatever. Writing is not easy. You have to kind of work at it. But this writer's block, people say, hey, I haven't written a word for months because I'm blocked. No, you're not blocked. You just haven't fucking thought what you're going to write about.
That was the answer we were all looking for. So, when it comes to your own personal reading, are you an e-reader man or a real hardback copy version?
Not a lot of people know, but I actually, probably am guilty. I wrote the world's first electronic novel. It's in the Science Museum now, called Host. It was published by Penguin on 2 floppy disks, in addition to being in print. And they did it as an experiment, and it came out in 1994. And I was pilloried by the world press. I was front page news in every Italian newspaper. This man, muerto, the novel. And then in the way these things happen, I became the world leading authority on the future of the novel. And I got invited to Los Angeles to make a keynote speech on the future of the novel. And I arrived at UCLA, horribly tired and jet-lagged, found myself on the podium with Steve Jobs on my right, Nicholas Negroponte from the MIT Media Lab on my left, and the president of Time Warner, and I was the one giving the talk.
No pressure.
And I sort of bumbled into the speech, and I said, I think ebooks will take off when they become as nice to read as the printed book and more convenient, which is pretty much where we're at. Personally, I hate them because I love my printed. I have a Kindle, and I've got just about every ebook that's ever come out. But I find I'm often reading late at night. I'm tired. I read a few pages and I think, who's that character? I want to go back. Have you tried going back on the Kindle? It's a nightmare. Give me paper. And you're not lying on a beach somewhere and your book dies on you.
And also, it hurts you more when it lands on you when you fall asleep as well.
And the Kindles are great. I mean, I love the fact that I can be anywhere in the world. And Laura and I will say, well, that's an interesting review I've just read, and that paper about a book, and boink, 90 seconds later, I could be reading it. That's the great thing about them. But give me print over electronic any time.
And you write on the PC as well, you mentioned.
Yeah, I do. The best birthday present I ever had in my life was my 17th birthday, and my dad knew I wanted to be a writer, and he got me a little portable electric typewriter and this great big battle axe of a woman to give me typing lessons. And she came to the house every day for a week, and she would cover up the keypads. And if I looked down, she'd hit my knuckles with a ruler.
Them were days, I tell you.
Yeah. But I can touch type really fast, and I've tried these dictating things. I've got I'm a Mac user, and there's all kinds of stuff now where you can just dictate. I feel an idiot talking out loud. I still like the physical act of typing.
Yeah. So we're on the subject of technology, and we've already touched on your research. It seems like a really fast-moving branch, forensic science, of science, and we've touched on forensic podiatry tonight. There's forensic psychiatry, and no doubt other disciplines as well. How on earth do you stay abreast of that as you're writing? Who do you consult? How do you go about that?
Well, I've been lucky in developing a particular great relationship with Sussex Police, with Roy Grace's homeland, but also with the Met and with police forces around the world. Wherever I travel on book promotion, I always ask my foreign publishers if they can introduce me to police. And as a result, I've become friendly and got the confidence of quite a lot of police forces in many different countries, including Moscow, where I've been out with police. But I think that there is forever a game of catch-up. It's very interesting how crime is constantly changing. It doesn't stay still. I remember about 10 years ago, Brighton Police Station every morning have something they call jokingly morning prayers. And it's a 9 o'clock meeting with all the duty inspectors of Brighton and Hove. And they sit around and they look at everything that's been going on the last 24 hours. Missing persons, wanted persons, accidents, robbery. And the commander of Brighton and Hove then, a guy called Kevin Moore, turned to me and said, "You come on a historic day. This is the first day since records began. There's not been an overnight domestic burglary in the city of Brighton and Hove." And I said, "Amazing, you won the war on crime." And he laughed and he said, "No," he said, "criminals change." He said, "The old style, what they used to call a creeper burglar, is the guy who'd shin up your drain pipe in the middle of the night and steal a Georgian silver." He said, "He's a dinosaur. People have lights now, they stay up late, they've got television, they've got dogs, they've got alarms." He said he can make much more money as a drug dealer or internet crime. And the fastest growing area of crime right now is financial crime. The constant comms you get on email. And I'm always trying to keep abreast of anything that's happening, and technology is always changing. I remember about talking, I was up at the DNA labs up at Reading, one of the major police ones, and I said, do you find that programs like CSI are helping criminals? And they said, absolutely, they've all become much more forensic aware, so now they wear body stockings, and they wear gloves, and they do their crime, and then they throw the gloves in a waste bin, and we get the DNA by turning it inside out. And the police are always, there's a kind of constant game of catch-up going on, but one moment it's the villains, the next moment it's the police. One example was, and I was asked not to write about it for some years, now it's open knowledge, but the police were quite astute at times and quite canny in their kind of development of ideas. And one idea that the police came up with for surveillance was using deaf and dumb people with binoculars to lip read instead of trying to hide prison, so they could watch drug deals from a mile away and actually arrest people from the evidence they got from what they were saying. And when I met Hayden, I just went, wow, because I had not heard of any author using forensic podiatrists. And I've used him now, and I'm just writing the 4th novel in which I've had Hayden. And he's not always been totally happy with me, because I remember the first time I sent him if I ever use anybody in research, I always send them the chapters for their approval and comment. The first thing Hayden said, could you not have me in a fawn suit with a bright emerald tie?
So you.
But then in another book, I've got him looking like he's dragged through a hedge backwards. which he told me he was. Was that what?
I spent an hour and a half in there's one element in Want You Dead, which is the third book that I appear in the Detective Roy Gray series. And there was, Peter and I were exchanging stories one evening, and there was an occasion when I was a student that I spent an hour and a half standing in a hedge, just having a rest, going home after a Saturday night out, just so tired, been out in the town, stood for an hour and a half against the hedge. So the phrase, I think, that in Want You Dead is something along the lines of, it looked like he'd spent the night in a hedge, so now you know where that line comes from.
So, thinking about your characters then, you write about serial killers and the darker side of humanity, and yet you seem like quite a nice bloke. I think Lara agrees with it because she married you the other day. She's kind of doing that right now. So where does this come from? How does it affect you, immersing yourself in that world?
I think I've always had a fascination with the dark side of life, why people do the things that they do. I do a lot of talks in prisons for two reasons. One, I'm very involved with the charity, the Reading Agency, which tries to improve literacy in this country. And it's a very sad indictment that the average reading age in a UK prison is 9 years old.
Goodness, really.
I often tell a joke when I'm in prisons. I say, two guys sitting in a cell talking, and one says, "What do you do?" I said, "What do you do?" He said, "Well, last time I was in here, they taught me how to read and write. Now I'm in for forgery." But the other thing that I get out of it is the opportunity to talk to the prisoners, and I am constantly astonished by human nature. It's kind of interesting. With men's prisons, they're categorized A, B, C, D. So the A are the max security, so you get the terrorists and the mass murderers. And the B are the same, where the security is not quite so good. And then they go down to D, like Ford in Sussex, which is an open prison, which is, you get a lot of white-collar workers go there. But also lifers who are coming back in the community as their sort of staging post. Women's prisons, they lump them all together. And they tend to sit in groups, which is kind of interesting. So you'll get a group of white women between about sort of 18 or 25, and they're all the hookers. And you get a group of black girls between about sort of 20 to 30, and they're the drug dealers. Then you get a mixed group of women in their 40s to 60s, and they're the husband killers. And I was a couple of years back giving a talk in one, and there was this woman sitting in the latter group, but she was very smartly dressed, and she was asking really intelligent questions. And I thought, you're definitely a cut above the average person in terms of what your reading experience is. So I'm thinking, wonder what you've done. So my guess was she'd killed somebody driving, maybe she was texting, whatever. And at the end, we get up and we mingle. And I never say to somebody, "What have you done?" I always start off, I say, "How much longer do you have to go?" So I went up this woman, and I said her the question. She said, 9.5 more bloody years, and it's just not fair. This woman did exactly what I did in London. She's only got 6 more years. I said, "Oh, what brought you in here?" She said, "Well, I poisoned my mother-in-law, the old bag." I said, "Okay." She said, "Well, the thing is, she went into hospital to die, and the bloody woman didn't die. And while she was there, I embezzled her bank account. And she bloody well came home, and then I realized, so I had to poison her. Then I realized my husband would find out, and I had to poison him too. And it's just not fair. This woman in London did exactly what I did. She's only got 6 more years to go."
Showing how logic works in people's brains, isn't it?
That is so scary. I mean, it's wonderful, but at the same time, that is somebody who is just indignant that having killed 2 people. Yeah. And when the officer taking that, I said, "Is this for real?" He said, "Absolutely, sir. Her husband, 3 months on life support, he's got permanent brain damage, and she's just indignant about the length of a sentence."
And do you kind of distance yourself to a certain extent from becoming too immersed with them? You're sort of more. It would affect me, I think, if I had such close contact constantly in that world. How do you cope?
I think I'm fairly. I guess because I write about it and I'm kind of fascinated and I'm lucky with having the great, I mean, Lara loves animals, so we have a kind of massive menagerie of animals at home, and I find that they're great to kind of be with as a kind of antidote to the horrors that I see and encounter in my work. But it does fascinate me, and I in terms of writing crime as opposed to what's going on in the real world, and Hayden, you were talking about terrorism earlier. I think there are real fears and there are fictional fears. I have very real fears, like everyone. What's going on in the world worries me, and I think part of the joy of reading crime fiction, or even a ghost story, which we like, is that you can actually control your fear. If you get a bit nervous, you can close the pages and wait for daylight and then carry on reading. And I do have this kind of quest to understand people. I am fascinated by the human condition. I spent a day in Broadmoor some years as a researcher. I would like to add, and to be admitted to Broadmoor, you have to be violently criminally insane. And I got taken around by the chaplain, and it was one of the most extraordinary days I've ever encountered, because I don't know if anybody's ever been there as a visitor or inmate. Escaped. This lady there, did you escape, or were you researching?
No, I was a flick of the hand and it was an error.
And the chaplain, Broadmoor is a really horrible looking place. It's Victorian red brick, it's on a hilltop, red brick with watchtowers and double walls, so it's like a complete sort of Gothic prisoner of war camp. And I remember the chaplain had his keys on a leather fob, and I said, I'm quite surprised you have these on leather, you don't have them on a chain. He said, oh, we used to carry them on a chain, but one of our inmates tore one of our officers in half.
Oh my goodness.
He said, now we have it on leather so it would break. So that was my introduction going in. And I said to him at one point, I said, do you believe that there are people who are born evil, or does something happen to them in life? And he said, every single person in Broadmoor is one of two categories. He said, around half are schizophrenic. And a schizophrenic is somebody who has voices for God, like Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, who had voices from God telling him to go kill prostitutes. He said quite a high percentage of those people can successfully take medication and go back and live ordinary lives. Why do they still on medication? He said the other 50% we have are psychopaths, sociopaths, same thing. And he said how they turn out in life will, to some extent, and it's simplifying it a lot, he said, but to some extent will depend on the upbringing they have. If they're brought up in a warm, nurturing environment, they can go on and become highly successful business people or politicians. Norman F. Dixon wrote a book called Our Own Worst Enemy, in which he said the best qualification to get to the top was to be a psychopath. Tony Blair, Richard Nixon, Mugabe, Robert Maxwell. The kind of list of people is endless, and as we're tweeting, I have to be careful about all the people we talk about, but it's a great qualification because psychopaths tend by their nature to be smart, utterly ruthless, will say anything it takes to get to the top. But it's not the best qualification once you're at the top, which is why so many ultimately tumble. But the psychopath who's born into a bullying family or an abusive family, is sexually abused by a parent, a broken family, they can then really warp. I mean, Adolf Hitler, I guess, would be the most classic example of bullying father, wouldn't let him do what he wanted, which is become a painter. But if you look at most serial killers, and my You Are Dead, which is the current book, is my first time I've written actually about a serial killer in a novel. Almost every serial killer has something that happened in their childhood or their youth that warped them.
It's beyond fascinating. I could talk to you all night, listen to you all night. But I'm also very interested because you have Hayden as a real-life, as himself character. On the spectrum moving through, we have characterized but fictional characters based on people you may have met. And then we have ghosts in the supernatural. What are your inspirations for the ghosts in the supernatural bit? I'm curious.
Well, I've lived in 2 haunted houses, so nobody's going to convince me that ghosts do not exist. And the house on Cold Hill actually is a return. My first successful book was in 1988, a novel called Possession, which was a supernatural chiller, I guess. And I haven't written in that terrain for 20 years, but in 1989, my then wife and I bought we were both townies, and in fact the characters in Cold Hill are, their town is, it's a couple, they live in Brighton, they've got a 12-year-old daughter, and they've always had this dream of living in the country, except for the daughter who hates the idea. And they buy this big wreck of a Georgian mansion, and first weekend the daughter's on Facebook to her best friend who's still in Brighton, moaning about the place, and her friend says, "Who's that lady standing behind you?" Well, our journey was that, again, I'd always had this dream of living in the country, and we bought this huge Georgian manor house outside Brighton. It was a wreck. It had been a monastery in the Middle Ages, and before that it had been a Roman villa. And the owner said to me, "So you'll like this place with what you write." He said, "We've got 3 ghosts." Actually, he fibbed. We had 4, if we were to find out. But I always remember the day we moved in, I was standing with my mother-in-law outside the front of the house. And she was a very down-to-earth lady. She was a magistrate. But she had a slightly fey side to her, that she'd have a particular dream of somebody who was going to die. And there was a long hallway which opened into like an anteroom to the kitchen. And we were guiding the removals man, and I suddenly saw there's a shadow go like that across this anteroom, down the end of the hall, about the length of this kind of room to the projection booth. And my mother-in-law said, "Did you see that?" And I knew she'd seen something. Equally, I didn't want my wife to be freaked out day one, so I just said, "No, I didn't see anything." And the next day, she was a solicitor, like Carol in the book. She'd gone off to Brighton to work, and I was at home writing. And I went down at 10:30 to make a cup of coffee. And as I went in this anteroom where I'd seen the shadow, I saw these tiny pinpricks of light floating in the air. And I thought it was my glasses, so I took my glasses off, put them back on, and they'd gone. And I thought, it must be my imagination. Then I went down at lunchtime, same thing again. And then in the mid-afternoon for a cup of tea, and again I saw these pinpricks. And I didn't say anything when my wife came home. And the next day I took our dog for a walk down the lane, and this old man came up to me and he said, "Oh, you Mr. James?" I said, "Yes, you just bought the manor." I said, "Yeah." He said, "How are you getting on with your grey lady then?" I said, "What grey lady?" And he then said that he used to house sit for the previous owners, and they were away during the winter, and he had an armchair and a television in this anteroom. He said had the heat from the kitchen, so it's a nice snug place. And he said, "I was watching telly one night, and this woman in grey silk crinoline with a really malicious face just came out the oak panelling, came straight at me. She said she flicked my face with the edge of her dress, and it stung my cheek, and disappeared in the wall behind me." He said, "I was out there." He said, "Wild horses would not get me back in that house." And I still decided not to say anything to my wife. I thought maybe he was a bit nutty. But a couple of days later, we had lunch with my mother-in-law, and I took her aside, and I said, "What did you see?" And she described this one exactly as I'd seen it. So then I said to my wife, I decided to tell her, and she said, "Well, actually, I've seen her several times, and I'll tell you, and freak you out." So,
well, suddenly it's feeling a bit chilly in here, I'll be honest. I think if I could just ask you one last question before we turn to the floor and take some questions for both of you, actually. Same question as I asked Hayden. What would you say to your younger self? What advice would you give?
It's a great question. Somebody once said that life has to be lived forward, but it can only be understood in reverse. I think I didn't have any confidence as a child. I never believed anybody would. I always wanted to be a writer, but I never believed anybody would ever read what I wrote. And I think dreams can come true. I think I'd love to have believed that when I was a kid.
That is such a lovely note that we could end this whole interview on. I think that's perfect. Thank you so much, Peter. Can we please show our appreciation?